Think about if the retail sector was doing as poorly as caregivers are doing right now in this country. Like, we would be intervening.
Just come with me to work one day, working with the seniors, assisting with their bathing, going to cook a meal, maybe taking them to their appointments.
And the problem is twofold, right? Like, the problem is that society at large does not value those tasks or see them as meaningful. And we need to stop gaslighting overwhelmed women by telling them that they wouldn't be so stressed if they just saw the drudgery as sacred, meaningful work.
I'm Julie Rose, and this is Top of Mind. I have been a radio journalist for 2 decades, but a few years ago, I found myself avoiding the news for long stretches because of how depressing and divisive it all seems. I still wanted to be informed and engaged on important issues, though, and I figured I couldn't be alone in that. So we created this podcast. Each episode, we tackle one tough topic in a way that will challenge you, help you feel more empathy, and empower you to become a better citizen, a kinder neighbor, and a more effective advocate. Today, how we value the act of caring for others.
My husband and I were both so overwhelmed at the time that staying on top of dishes and laundry and just random clutter, it seemed like it was impossible.
This is Casey Davis. She's a therapist and a podcaster.
I gave birth like 3 weeks before the pandemic lockdowns. So all of a sudden I was in the house. My husband, he's working 6 days a week. I'm at home with a newborn and a toddler, and I quickly became depressed. One of the biggest outward signs, besides the anger that I felt, was the housework. The first TikTok I ever posted was this kind of joke about, look at all the mess in my house and I'm not doing any of it. And the last frame is me holding a breastfeeding baby. And I'll never forget, one of the first comments was some woman calling me lazy. There's that part of my head that's really critical that wanted to agree with it. But then there was this part of my head that was I'm literally still bleeding. And I've done nothing but care for this baby all day and all night. A year later, I looked back on that video. What I recognized was that what was mostly in my sink was parts of a food processor. And at that time, I was like, what was I food processing at 4 weeks postpartum? I had made homemade enchiladas that required food processing, something like the sauce. And it was just so funny because it was this is what society would look at and be like, you're lazy, you're a bad mom, you're a bad woman. And yet, the reason it was messy is because still bleeding and stitched up, caring for 2 small children, I was making homemade enchiladas. That's the opposite of lazy.
The world runs on care work, cooking and cleaning, childcare and elder care. I'm talking about any labor that makes it possible for people to thrive. The vast majority of it is done by women. 2/3 of it is entirely uncompensated, which makes the value of it easy to underestimate. But if you add up all the hours spent in a year on unpaid care in America and multiply that by the local minimum wage, you get $1 trillion. That's as much as the entire construction industry contributes to the economy. And yet, none of it is accounted for in the official measures of the nation's economic health or productivity, like the unemployment rate or gross domestic product. Now, there are some economists who say it's time to change that, particularly since the COVID pandemic showed just how quickly productivity grinds to a halt when formal sources of childcare, home care, and elder care disappear. There is, in fact, renewed interest among U.S. politicians and policymakers to consider new laws and programs that would support parents and caregivers. Meanwhile, the paid care sector has a critical shortage of daycare staff, home health aides, and certified nursing assistants. It's not uncommon to hear experts talk of a care crisis facing the United States. So today on Top of Mind, we're going inside the care economy to better understand how it works and how it could be different. Now, as far back as anthropologists can tell, women have shouldered the primary role of caregiving. And that hasn't changed, even as more women than ever are also participating in the paid workforce. Casey Davis had scaled back her work as a therapist by the time she gave birth to her second daughter, just as the COVID lockdowns began. Isolated and overwhelmed, she posted that first video on TikTok as a lighthearted plea for solidarity from other struggling moms. She never dreamed it would go viral.
A lot of the comments were like, oh my gosh, somebody's house that finally looks like mine. And I feel so much shame that my house is so messy. And so I think that's when the therapist in me kind of kicked in. And I was like, well, wait a second. There's nothing morally reprehensible about being messy or feeling overwhelmed. And I realized that a lot of people who were really struggling with cleaning and doing the dishes and even basic hygiene tasks and brushing their teeth, we were all kind of stuck in this frozen place where we had believed that those things were moral failures that we needed to be ashamed of. And so we didn't want to ask for help because we felt like the answer was going to be quit being lazy and just do it. And so that's kind of where this journey began for me. And I started specifically making videos about care tasks being morally neutral.
The videos took off and became a community online where women commiserate and support one another. Casey Davis calls her platform Struggle Care. It now includes a podcast and a book called How to Keep House While Drowning.
I have sort of an interesting story in that I fell into a pretty severe drug addiction when I was in my early teenage years. And I was actually hospitalized, and then I went inpatient for residential treatment for 18 months. And it was really hardcore behavior modification. And part of that was we talked about trauma, we talked about drug use and getting sober, but a big part of that was this focus on we're going to make you a productive member of society. So you had to shower every day for a certain amount of minutes, you had to brush your hair every day, you had a chore every single day that got checked. So all of these quote unquote care tasks, right? Cleaning dishes, cleaning your room, dusting. I was taught those skills, and then I was put under a very heavy sort of behavioral contract where lots of punishments and rewards, to where for almost 2 years, I was doing those things every day. And so when I got out, I was 18 years old, and I was just a different person. And the years after that, I continued to stay in therapy. I continued to stay sober. I can continue to grow emotionally and spiritually and mature into an adult. But the day I got out of rehab, I went back to being messy. I went back to being someone who kind of dreads taking a shower and so only washes her hair a couple times a week. I went back to being someone who was never organized. And I just kind of figured out through that process, oh, I don't think these things were connected. This, in fact, everyone kind of looked at my general messiness as oh, she's so irresponsible because she has this addiction. But then when I became my most responsible self, I was still a really messy person.
And making that realization, though, required you to sort of redefine those tasks as what then, really?
Yeah, so the reason I started calling them care tasks is because I realized that so many of us learned about cooking, cleaning, hygiene, brushing your teeth, even things like taking your meds, getting exercise, those things became the to-do list that measured whether or not we were worthy human beings, whether we were valid adults and good mothers and good wives. And we saw it as this sort of indictment on our worthiness. And what I realized was that we need to reconceptualize these tasks as the only purpose in doing them is because I'm a person who deserves to be cared for. I deserve to sleep in clean sheets. I deserve to eat off clean plates. That is the only reason. And if I am struggling to produce clean plates and clean sheets in my house, then it just means that I'm having a really hard time and I need help. And I need help that is non-judgmental and compassionate and practical.
And what happens if you are not able to separate those two, the things that you mentioned, the care tasks from your own worthiness and value?
It's a great question because I think a lot of us are socialized to believe that shame is very motivating. If we just make someone feel badly enough, they will want to do anything to get away from that pain. And so they'll do whatever it takes. But in reality, my experience as a therapist who I worked in addiction for years and years and years, shame is the most demotivating emotional experience. it might sometimes work in the short term to get someone to change their behavior so long as people are looking at them, because we are hardwired for connection and we are afraid of social rejection.
Yeah.
But the thing is that if my behavior change is based on wanting to be accepted and not rejected, that doesn't create an internal motivation. It doesn't create skills for learning better how to do these things. And so when I'm at home by myself, it's paralyzing. It's freezing. It makes most of us feel as though we are broken and wrong. And then because we are so afraid of social rejection, we want to hide that brokenness. We don't want anyone to see it. So we don't talk about our struggles. We don't reach out for our struggles. And we all feel alone. And I always say that like shame doesn't give anyone skills.
When you were able to set that shame aside, what's a skill that you were able to acquire?
Well, one thing that I realized was that when I get really overwhelmed in a room, like there's lots of things, there's lots of clutter, I kind of freeze and I go, oh my gosh, it's going to take so long. It's going to be so miserable. And so a couple of skills I learned was one, to get a clock or a timer and say, you know what, I'm just going to clean for 15 minutes. No more, no less, just 15 minutes. And if it gets to 15, I want to keep going, that's fine. If not, I'm going to stop. And that kind of gets over this feeling of overwhelm. This is going to take so long. And so that I don't feel that hesitancy. I don't feel like, oh, I need to procrastinate this.
And do you often find that when you get to the end of 15 minutes, you're like,
100% of the time,
so
right? Like
okay.
100% of the time that, sometimes the motivation precedes the action.
How do you think about the kinds of caregiving that aren't laundry and dishes? So helping a child through a bad day at school, spending some time sort of helping them process their emotions, or even helping them with a homework assignment. Do you consider those care tasks?
I do. So, I mean, everything is a task. And I think what's so difficult is that so much of care tasks are invisible labor. So, helping a child with their homework isn't necessarily invisible, but remembering that they have homework, making the time to sit down and ask for that homework. And that's true of anything, though. Like cooking dinner isn't necessarily an invisible task, but if you're making sure that you have all those ingredients and you're doing the time planning for those ingredients and you're thinking about how are we going to get these leftovers eaten before they go bad, and what do we have and what do we don't have, and when am I going to go to the grocery store, like all of those things. And I think that's what can be really difficult for women in particular, is that, there are lots of things you can do in your career that have very visible results. And when you produce something and when you accomplish something, there are people that see it and put a stamp of approval and go, this is so great and it's excellent, and you move on from that project. But then when we talk about care tasks are cyclical. Even if you were to get everything done, you've just hit a time clock on the timer before somebody has dirty clothes or a dirty dish or plays with something on the ground and leaves it, or, spills a cracker. Now there's crumbs and it needs to be swept. And so it can feel as though there's nothing to show for it. And I find that most mothers have this battle where they want to spend quality time with their kids. They want to do those connecting moments, the helping with the homework, the spending time, the snuggling with the movie, the playing the game. But as they do that, they're constantly thinking about, oh, I got to do the dishes. Oh, I've got to wash that soccer uniform. And they almost feel guilty that they're not getting those things done. But then when we go to do those things, right, and little Timmy's going, Mom, come play. And we go, I can't. Well, now we feel guilty again because we feel like we're denying them these moments, and it kind of feels like you can't win. And some of that is kind of a societal message. Some of that is, some of that's our own messaging of not allowing things to just be imperfect and be good enough. And, notice that nobody can do all the things all the time. And it's okay that Timmy has to be told no sometimes. And it's okay that the dishes don't get done sometimes.
So how do you coach women to be okay with that?
Well, I think first is identifying like what is your functional, and what does it mean to be functional? Okay, clean dishes to eat off of, clean clothes to wear, medication refilled, things like that. And when it gets into cleaning, it's like, okay, well, is it being able to walk somewhere without tripping on things. We don't want mold and bugs growing. So if you start at that really basic level and build from there, and everyone's different, like everyone's tolerance for mess is different, everyone's brain is different. I think it also is a big part of letting go of what we think is like aesthetically pleasing. And these arbitrary rules. Like I stopped folding my laundry a couple of years ago, and it has been life-changing. I started doing a family closet. So, because I realized that I was going to 3 different closets to dress 3 different people. Like, I don't need to go to my 1-year-old's closet, right? And then go to my 3-year-old's closet, and then go to my closet. So I realized, like, I can just take us all into one closet where all the clothes are. Because I spent 8 months of my postpartum with a giant pile of laundry on the floor that I would live out of, right? Because I could get it in the washer. I'd have to wash it a couple times because I'd forget and it would mildew, and then I'd wash it again. And then I get it in the dryer, and then I could pull it onto the floor, and it would just go nowhere because I hated folding clothes. And it was hard to get the time to fold clothes when you're juggling kids. And then one day I just realized, like, what if I just skipped that step? And instead of folding anything, I just bought a bunch of little baskets. And I sat down in front of with my pile, and I went, okay, the shirts go there, the shirt, pants. And so I stopped folding anything. And were things wrinkled? Yes, but you know what? They were organized. So my quality of life and my functioning really increased by cutting out this. And everyone's like, but they're wrinkled. And I'm like, Susan, they were wrinkled before. The choices were never between wrinkled and unwrinkled. They were wrinkled on the floor, or they were wrinkled and organized. And wrinkled and organized is better.
What difference does that make for you then as a mother when you're able to really lean into what's functional and also my value is not connected to my house, my housework?
I think it really frees me up to be able to do that dance better. Like it doesn't solve any of the systemic pressures of, living in a nuclear family and being the one at home. And I mean, I have a wonderful husband that helps as much as he can with the family labor, but he's also just like logistically, he is out of the house for many, many hours. And the few hours he's in the house, I don't want to spend those times watching him do laundry. I want us to hang out, right? But that means being okay with laundry not being done so we can hang out. And it means that I've just gotten a little more okay with this is a season of life. And yes, I have to find ways to get the laundry done and the dishes done and the house cleaned, but it doesn't have to look great. It just has to work. And I can spend that time with my kids, and I can spend that time, and I feel like I'm giving them better skills. I feel like I'm doing better parenting by almost like I'm teaching them internal motivation for these skills. Because I always say, like, if I raise kids that make their bed every single day until they're 18, but then the moment they move out, they don't have any internal motivation to do care tasks, that's not a win. But if I raise kids that never make their bed a day in their life, but then one day when they wake up and they're 27 and they just became a mom and they go, oh my God, I can't just fly by the seat of my pants anymore. I got to do some stuff. Yeah, they might need some, tips and tricks, but they're not going to have that internal barrier of, it has to be perfect or I'm a bad person. Like they're just going to go, oh yeah, I think I want to do something different, and then find a system that works for them.
Is it possible to find joy and purpose in doing a care task?
I think it is possible. I also think it's totally okay if you don't. I think I find a lot of joy in care tasks because I enjoy some of that kind of stuff. But I actually
like what?
think,
What's a care task?
I enjoy decorating, and I enjoy sewing, and I enjoy making my kid just upgrade to a big girl bed. And I loved picking that bed out with her and putting it in her room and putting it together. And I enjoy that. I enjoy sometimes, organizing the toys so that it all kind of like everything has a spot. I occasionally enjoy cooking a meal when it's not, oh my God, dinner has to be on the table. And the problem is twofold, right? Like the problem is that society at large does not value those tasks or see them as meaningful. And they are valuable and they are meaningful. And we need to stop gaslighting overwhelmed women by telling them that they wouldn't be so stressed if they just saw the drudgery as sacred, meaningful work. I think no woman should feel pressured to find boring tasks inspiring. But I do think you should feel free to believe that all of your labor is just as valuable and important as labor that's being paid.
Casey Davis is the author of How to Keep House While Drowning. She has done a very popular TED Talk that I recommend people check out, and she's the creator of the Struggle Care platform. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
In America today, middle-aged women in particular are finding themselves sandwiched between caring for the needs of their kids and of their baby boomer parents. They report high levels of emotional and financial stress. And if they're lucky, they can afford to pay someone to help out. And there, too, the work is done primarily by women.
They're young mothers, they're immigrants, they're women of color, they're older women such as myself. I'm 60. I'm tired. Like I'm just working doing all this for $7.25.
Why is it that when we do pay people to assist our loved ones in their most intimate needs, they earn some of the lowest hourly wages in our economy? Little more than fast food workers, in fact. I'm Julie Rose. This is Top of Mind from the BYU Radio Podcast Network. Hey friends, if you are looking for another great show from the BYU Radio family of podcasts, check out Constant Wonder. Host Marcus Smith takes you on an exhilarating journey through captivating stories of our magnificent natural world. You'll gain profound insight into different facets of our planet, discover more about nature, and maybe even ponder your connection to Earth's wonder. The show is Constant Wonder, and you can find it wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Deandra Clark. I'm a direct care worker from Charlotte, North Carolina. I've been helping seniors with daily activities like, getting dressed, bathing, feeding for over a decade now.
Clark was already in her 50s when she transitioned into home health care in 2013. She'd been waiting tables, but lifting the heavy trays of food at Red Lobster started hurting her shoulder. And she had a cousin working in home health.
So she was like, they down there could apply, you could be a caregiver, you good with people, you know what to do. I took care of my mom, my grandma before they passed, and my dad. So I went ahead and applied for the position, and lo and behold, it was like $7.25 an hour. So I was a caregiver working with the seniors, assisting with their bathing, going to cook a meal, just being a companion, maybe taking them to their appointments if their family members lived out of town. So I was working and doing that, and I was like, dang, I got to work another job, too, because it's still not paying enough.
So Clark picked up additional shifts with a second home health agency just to boost her income. They were long days, never really knowing what she'd find in the home when she arrived.
It might be other people living in the home, like relatives. So sometimes I would go and have to kind of straighten up around to get what I needed to do for my patient, the client. If other people were there and it's a sink full of dishes and I had to go and make some oatmeal because she wanted oatmeal in the morning. So the stove might be a mess and I got to find a clean pot of stuff. So it was challenging in that way when you go to somebody's home to care for them. Another time, they sent me to this lady's house. Her daughter was stressed out. So she's like, oh, I'm so glad you came. Her mother, she had her, and this was a little short lady, and her mother was a larger sized lady. She was like, and she said, my mom been laying on this couch for 3 days. Her mother was soiled. She was like, I didn't know what to do, so I knew you was coming today because it was the first time they started getting assistance. And I told her, Mrs. whatever her name is, we got you. Got her to the chair. Then we got her in that chair. Then I said, let's roll her in this bathroom. So when I got her cleaned up, it was just, and they were grateful. And I was grateful, but I was tired. I said, woo, all this for $7.25. Not to be laughing, but you know what? I did it, and I'm grateful I was there to help them.
After 6 years, Clark switched from doing home health to working in a nursing home where the pay was better. Much better, actually, because it was the start of the pandemic, and emergency relief funding boosted wages for frontline workers.
They was paying $20 an hour. So that doubled what I was making. So I went full blast into them agencies, COVID facility. It was crazy. So now you ain't just you don't have one person. Now you got 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 people to take care of in the 8 hours. So you moving nonstop, room to room to room to room to room. And you got to have compassion and empathy with these people because they not in the best health. They don't feel good. So don't be mean to them. I have some people and I'm like, no, 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 baby, we ain't about to do that. We're going to teamwork. We're going to be nice to these people.
Even before the pandemic, skilled nursing facilities were experiencing a critical shortage of care workers and nursing assistants because of the intensity of the work and the low pay relative to other fields. That shortage has deepened now that pandemic funding is gone. The national median for certified nursing assistants is $18.30 an hour. In the last year, Deandra Clark left direct care work to become a field organizer for the National Domestic Workers Alliance, which advocates for rights and protection of paid care workers across the country.
They are young mothers, they're immigrants, they're women of color, they're older women such as myself. So I visit a lot of my old jobs and talk to my old coworkers and encourage them to, use your voice, advocate for a higher wage, better working conditions, better insurance, because if you don't say anything, they're going to keep on paying you a low wage and the bills don't stop.
Now, a major reason that direct care workers make so little is they're often paid through Medicaid, which is jointly funded by states and the federal government. Medicaid reimbursement rates vary widely between states. They're often capped, and of course, they're subject to political pressures too. Also, since not all federal wage and discrimination laws actually apply to domestic workers, the National Domestic Workers Alliance is advocating for a Bill of Rights to extend basic wage and workplace protections to them. As of 2024, 12 states and the District of Columbia have passed a version of that legislation. But Deandra Clark says perception is really the biggest barrier to improving conditions for workers like her.
When I went and talked to some of the legislators, just come with me to work one day. Just come on. You don't have to do anything. I just want you to watch what I do. I value my labor. Do you? That's why a lot of people don't work in healthcare. That's why it's understaffed. It's essential for everybody to have that service sometime in life, even if you don't need it long term, even if it's just temporary. Say something happened. We never know what might happen, an accident. Oh, my God, I ain't never been in this situation. I ain't never had nobody coming this close and personal to me. But then to see that humbleness, that person, so, okay, I got you. I'm going to clean your face. I'm going to make sure you're good. I'm going to change your wound. I'm going to care for you like I would want to be cared for. They need to know that and value this service of labor that we give.
Deandra Clark is a field organizer for the National Domestic Workers Alliance and a care worker herself in North Carolina. Thank you so much for your time today, Deandra.
Thank you so much, Julie, for having me.
Now, the actual dollar value that we place on the paid work done by Clark and her colleagues in home health, childcare, and household management in the United States is about $500 billion a year. But if we add the $1 trillion worth of unpaid care that we calculated earlier, the total value of all care work done in America each year triples to $1.5 trillion. That's the size of the entire retail industry. And yet, our economic measures leave most of that out.
We live in a capitalist society. Money ascribes value. So when we totally ignore the economic contributions of caregivers, parents, etc., we're just not valuing real labor.
Next, we'll find out why so much care work remains in the shadows and what difference it might make to bring that work into the light. Top of Mind is a BYU Radio podcast. I'm Julie Rose. We'll be right back. Hey friends, I would like to take just a moment and introduce you to another show from the BYU Radio family of podcasts. It's The Lisa Show. Lisa Valentine Clark is the host. She's a comedian, actress, believer, single mom. And the show delves into the multitude of challenges that shape our lives, whether it's parenting, mental health questions, social issues. Lisa and the Council of Moms will tackle it and do it with a lot of laughs along the way as we attempt to figure out this thing called life. So check out The Lisa Show. Listen wherever you get podcasts. Here is just one example of the strange logic in how we value care work. Imagine a single father with several young kids. He hires a nanny to care for them while he's at work. In the U.S. economy, the nanny's job is counted as a contribution to the national gross domestic product, or GDP. But then, suppose he and the nanny fall in love and get married. Now she's doing the exact same work, caring for the same kids, but she's not getting paid for it. So the GDP has shrunk by one job.
We have overall systemically failed to acknowledge the breadth and depth of the ways that care contributes to our economy.
Alyssa Strauss is author of a new book called When You Care, The Unexpected Magic of Caring for Others.
I am a writer, essayist, journalist who's been writing about care from a number of angles for really almost 15 years now. I live in Oakland, California with my two kids who have also inspired much of my thinking on care, as much, if not more, than the experts. Basically, after the Great Depression, economists around the world thought, like, hey, we need to really find a way to measure what a nation's wealth is worth. That way we can know how much, we're falling in a hole during something like the Great Depression. So they came up with this concept of the GDP, this gross domestic product. And there was a group of economists that went to Africa to try to figure out, like, how would we measure such a thing? How might this work? And there was one female economist with them, a Scottish woman named Phyllis. And she went with a group of men, and they were observing what they were labeling productivity among the people they were observing. And she was like, oh, wait a minute. Like, you guys are focused on the marketplace and, these clear exchanges of goods and services. She's like, but what about all the women, walking a mile to get the water in the morning that they use in their domestic life? What about all this labor that she was saying women were doing? She's like, isn't this productive too? Like, think about, society would not work without it. Basically, what about the productivity in the home? She didn't win that fight. There was a conception of the GDP that ignored productivity in the home. For better and worse, since then, people have been saying this is a problem. People coming from all directions too. It's not just like a feminist rallying cry. It's genuinely an economic problem to not value care in domestic labor.
It's a problem because...
One, it's just money is value. Like, we live in a capitalist society. So when we totally ignore the economic contributions of caregivers, parents, etc., we're just not valuing real labor. Two, when we ignore it, we don't measure it, and therefore we can't get a clear picture of what investing in it would mean. There's a lot of conversation of, if we did universal childcare, it would cost X, Y, and Z. Well, you can say that if you don't have any research on what not doing it would provide, or what the big picture would be if we did have good, reliable childcare for all families, how that would benefit the future. So when you're not getting data about care at all, you really can't have a good measure of what the potential benefits are for long-term investments. And I think the third important point that economists bring up is that when we don't value care, we're not getting a clear picture on the economy at all, actually. So 2 examples of that. One is that when women started to go to work more and more into the paid workforce in the 1970s, by some measures, productivity went up. And right, of course it did, because the only way we measure productivity is that kind of labor. But economists have since gone back and said, wait, if we actually had measured domestic labor, perhaps productivity went down. So perhaps actually it was not this great economic engine. Again, that's no comment on whether or not women should work. It's just not a clear picture of productivity, of really the work being done in this country. And clarity is essential for making good economic policies, right? Another example that I love to share, because we've heard so much about how hard it was for many moms around this country during the pandemic. To the point where some moms were gathering in fields and screaming. And an economist I worked with at the government bureau in charge of such things, he did some research and found that actually all that labor of moms that was driving them to fields and making them scream was actually a big factor of why we as a whole economy went into a less of a recession than we had thought we were going, than economists had thought they were going to.
During
so
the
basically,
pandemic. Okay.
Yes, all that labor.
Monitoring the homeschool on Zoom and the laundry and the groceries and probably a lot of the home stuff that they were doing, but on top of also the full-time working and...
Exactly. And I'm going to throw in all those lunch, you were making lunch, the dishes because you were feeding people constantly at home, Right. That actually was very good for our economy. And I don't remember anyone coming out and shaking, mom's hands, proverbial speaking, and be like, thank you for helping save our economy during COVID. Think about if the retail sector was doing as poorly as caregivers are doing right now in this country. We would be intervening. There would be big, beautiful strategies being presented to say oh gosh, one of our most important sectors economically is really struggling. We need to do more to keep it going, because if it falls, it will really hurt our economy.
Well, can you
That's where we're at with care.
Yeah. So what exactly is going on? What are the symptoms or the signs that it's going so poorly?
I think and we had the Surgeon General of the United States just wrote about caregivers, particularly parental stress is high. Childcare is outrageously expensive. We still don't have paid leave policy. So if you have a child, you are not guaranteed income to stay home and care for that child. Your job may be protected for a little bit, but you're not guaranteed income. And that's very real. Many people have to go back to work a couple of weeks after giving birth and can't actually stay home and healthily connect with their child because we lack a policy to make that possible. The only industrialized nation in the whole world. I also want to add that it's not just childbirth, right? Kids get sick, partners get sick. We need to show up sometimes as intensive caregivers in moments outside of childbirth. And in those moments too, same thing. We don't have this paid leave policy.
Yeah.
Also, our workplaces just don't accept the reality of care. Work is very time intensive these days. Many workplaces, it's gotten better, and it actually got a lot better during COVID for the laptop class in particular, people who can work on their laptops, of having more flexibility and whatnot. But we're still in a place where it can feel really at odds to be in your office and have care responsibilities. And I don't think at the end of the day, we're actually going to get the support we need for caregivers unless we really see care in all of its fullness.
So in writing this book, you went through the exercise of trying to place a financial value, an economic value on the care that you were doing, that you do in your life. What did you find?
I want to put out the warning that I am hardly a great mathematician. I'm no economist, but I took some of the formulas these economists I was reading about and seeing how they valued care and applied them to our home. The second, I put a $sign on this time I was spent caring for Augie when he was little, we actually didn't really have a gender gap in our home. My productivity and economic contributions to the house equaled my husband's.
What difference did that make?
I think it put my mind at ease, but it also really helped me understand at a gut level, let it really sink in, of just how deeply we devalue care and how we don't even see it. It's just the air we breathe, the kind of water we swim in as a society. And it's really illustrated that point. I would have never, ever thought to do that.
And so your kids are how old now?
7 and 11.
And Augie's the older one, right? I believe you mentioned his name in the book. And then Levi is your younger
Correct.
son. Okay.
Yes.
So you first became a mother in
2012.
2012. Okay. So take me back to before that time. You were writing a lot about care. I guess you were thinking about it. What was your thought about becoming a mother?
So my main preoccupation at the time was to not let motherhood ruin me, basically, or make me a bad feminist. And I want to be clear, I wasn't ambivalent about the having of kids. I grew up in a family where there were 4 kids. My parents seemed to really genuinely get joy and meaning from being parents. So, I felt like I wanted to become a mom, but at the same time, I was kind of writing article after article about the way parents, particularly mothers, are discriminated against in the workplace, the way becoming, when you're a mom, if you work less, you're going to be contributing to the gender wage gap, and that's bad for all women. So I had this kind of push and pull between, I feel sure I want to have a kid, but I really don't want to become less of a person in the world when I have a kid. I was believing that if I lean too much into this mommy thing, I just won't matter anymore in the public's eye as a cool intellectual writer in New York City.
So what did that look like for you in those early days then, as you were trying to keep your identity as an important person?
In hindsight, so silly, such silly things, really, of, not joining mommy and me groups, not going to mommy yoga, not drinking mommy juice, aka wine, and just really trying. I mean, they were such honestly superficial guardrails, but at the time they were really meaningful to me, and I can laugh about them now, but I was serious then. I just didn't want to be a mom in any other environment except when I was mothering Augie. And that's how I saw it. And just put the blockade up. Like motherhood should stay in the cracks of your identity, but it can't be your identity. And, even when I was writing about motherhood, it was all about what motherhood takes away from us, the burdens of motherhood. Those are very real. I'm not here saying, and then I realized that doesn't matter, and those aren't true. 100%, right? It's still hard to be someone who's an active caregiver to small children or even older children and participate fully in public life. But that's all I could focus on. That was all I was writing on. I was never touching upon the good parts.
And so, can you recall a specific instance where you started to wonder if maybe you'd gotten the story wrong about care?
Yes. So there was a moment, really. So my son was probably, Augie, let's say 2.5 or 3 at the time. And we were going to this Friday morning, and we're Jewish, so it's a Tat Shabbat music class where we'd sing songs in preparation for the Jewish Sabbath, which starts on Friday night. And, there was a charismatic man with a guitar, and then they would get to have challah and grape juice after, which are the ritual foods for the Friday night Jewish Sabbath dinner. And all the other kids would sing along and dance along, and Augie would sit there totally still, full observer mode, didn't say a word. And then when I'd push him home in my stroller afterwards, then he would start singing every single song. And so I had that moment. I'm pushing him home, and I was like, all right, this is who he is. He's not going to sing. He may never sit and sing. And it was just Melissa, it's actually up to you to realize he's not going to do everything you want to do in his life. He's not going to make every decision how you would make it. He's not going to view the world how you view it.
I guess it sort of came to you fully in that moment that this 2-year-old toddler is a separate human being with interests and a destiny that's separate from your own.
Yeah. It really was the first moment when I realized what a profoundly philosophical, psychological, intellectual, spiritual experience this was. And that suddenly care became this place for rich personal epiphany, and epiphany about the nature of life itself. And it just changed the whole lens on the experience, just, from the roots up. Also, it's very much shaped, challenged, changed in very rich ways, a relationship with God. Just the fact that I birthed two singular consciousness is kind of mind-blowing to me. It was something that I could not really make sense of in any which way. And it made creation feel so real and so raw. And, there's many theologies around creation. And one of the theologies that weaves its way through many religions is this idea that we are partners with God in creation. And that really felt real and alive to me when I had kids. And not just when I had kids, because there's that moment of awe of childbirth, but it's the walking with the stroller, home and having those epiphanies and realizations that it is my role here to cultivate and help create this human, and also to stand back and witness this human that has something else animating it and igniting it. And that kind of push and pull felt like faith to me. And it continues to.
How did that change, I guess, the actual care that you were giving? Or did it?
Yeah, I think it made care much more enjoyable. And not because it was easier, but because I saw what happens in care as something just on a basic level, I'll say, worthy of my curiosity on many planes, right? That this is actually this amazing, complicated dance between humans. It is pulling out a part of me that I never really had to explore before, and how through caring for my kids, I learned things about myself that, therapists couldn't uncover, understood things about my childhood and my relationship styles, and that actually this wasn't just a kind of relationship in which I was going to give, but was also a relationship which I was going to get, and not just get things that I actually think our culture could use more of. So I think, for me, being in this relationship where another really depended on me pushed me to be more receptive to others and more open to the possibility that, again, people are different than me. And I say that lightly, but it's actually something very difficult, for us humans to grapple with. And I think we're seeing it more than ever in American culture right now, this intolerance for difference and a lack of curiosity. So for me, that shift, and I don't always win at this, but that shift for me is to enter the world from a position that is less certain and more curious and more receptive to others. Even in that split second when someone does something on the road you think is wrong, it's like, the instinct is to honk and just let them know that they're the bad ones. Just a little more gentleness. Like, you know what? That person kind of cut me off, but I don't know what they're going through today. Maybe they're late to go get their kids at, soccer practice, or they just had the worst day at work. And just like, I don't really need to honk at them right now. I can bring care into this relationship with a total stranger whose face I am not even seeing. I can bring my care self into this and be here in a state of humility and receptivity. And maybe also that person was a jerk, but you know what? If they were in fact just a jerk, they were going to be probably a jerk no matter what.
Yeah.
And if they were just someone who needed a little gesture of care in the smallest way, I gave it to them. So I think it's a win-win to lean towards care.
And so how do we address, though, the reality that you've pointed out a number of times and are careful to point out in the book as well, that there are a great many caregivers, many of them women in the United States, who are overwhelmed, burdened, and for whom care really has become a really negative experience for them in many aspects, whether it's motherhood or caring for the home, caring for other people in their life, elder care. So, why is it? Why is it that care is such a problem for so many people and yet also has this other capacity? How do you make sense of that?
Yeah, it's because the way we care now is totally broken and wrong. And it's not how humans evolved. That this idea, and we have also standards that are impossible for moms. So it's holding two things at once, let's say, right? Like I want to live in a world where it's not only the mom's responsibility to keep the household up to the standard that the family decides, right? Everyone has a different idea what clean is for them. It shouldn't only be the mom's responsibility. It should be a shared responsibility with the partner. Also, if a mom is staying home with their children when they're young, I would like to live in a society where the mom is getting some kind of child tax credit or some kind of income for that care. So that mom can outsource some of it. If the mom needs to hire someone to help clean the house so she can focus more intently on caring for her kids and caring for herself, because you cannot care well for others if you're not caring for yourself. She has a little income to do that. Or if a mom is working outside the house, there is affordable and reliable childcare for her during the day. So she's able to drop her kid off with confidence. When she picks up that kid at the end of the day, the kid's has been in an emotionally secure environment and is returning home, not screaming and whining, right? So we need to value care, not just as individuals, but also as a collective. And in doing that, we have to say, hey, this stuff really matters. This stuff is important, not degrade it, but also say it's not something we can do on our own.
So you're really advocating in this book, well, there are lots of policies that you refer to that we could consider, and they're really not mysterious to us anymore, right? But what you're advocating for in this book, Alyssa Strauss, is a cultural shift in the way we see caring and embrace it.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to have a real substantive policy shift until we have a cultural shift in how we value care. And for so long, care was kind of presented as a footnote to the human experience instead of the major plot point that it actually is in our lives. A real cultural reckoning, it helps us see care as a hero's journey that rivals any man going off to war or winning that big sports game, or any other Steven Spielberg movie. Basically, we've all seen, right? It has care as just as big, just as meaty, just as challenging, just as rich, just as transcendent as the things that we view as these major life experiences that shape us as humans and as a society. And I think that has to happen in very small ways. It starts with curiosity. It starts with curiosity for ourselves as caregivers. What is this doing to me? How am I being shaped by this? How is this challenging me? Which of those challenges are unjust and are going to push me to demand a society that changes how we treat and support caregivers? And which of those challenges are just an organic, natural, inevitable part of care? Because all big, meaningful things that we do in our life are challenging. And then we also have to direct that curiosity outward. What do we ask our friends about their care experiences? If we're at a dinner party and on one side of the table is a man who just hiked Mount Everest, and on the other side of the table is a man who is doing his shift in parental leave and is caring for a baby for the first time, who are we paying more attention to? Who's the big, fascinating person at that table? For me, it's the dad. I don't think enough people agree.
Alyssa Strauss is a journalist. She is author of the new book, When You Care, The Unexpected Magic of Caring for Others. Thank you so much for your time.
It was really my pleasure. Thank you so much.
If you'd like to further explore some of the topics we touched on today, check out the episodes of Top of Mind we did recently about the shortage of childcare in the United States and the increasing involvement of modern dads in caring for their kids. We'll link to both of those episodes in the show notes. Top of Mind is a BYU Radio podcast. Today's episode was produced by Elena Beck and me, with help from James Hoops, Samuel Benson, and Sam Payne. Our audio engineers are Gabe Vargas and Brandon Lewis. I'm Julie Rose. We'll talk soon.